Hi. Uh, considering we all just met, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is James Walton. I've been a student of San Diego Christian since about 2020. I am majoring in ministry and minoring in psychology. And that's really been sort of my primary focus. I did this on a whim. It was signs from God that He wanted me to pursue an education in him, you know, and we kind of left it at that. So I started doing research that day, and that's how I ended up at San Diego Christian. Um, the reason I'm here today is actually to talk about my personal testimony. Now, my personal testimony, I have a lot of really cool stories about God that I could get into, and really any of them could be my testimony. But oftentimes, I like to refer to myself as a longtime believer, not so long time serious Christian, but I can explain that. So, my journey with God started when I was um, probably about 5 or 6 years old, around kindergarten age. Growing up, I grew up, as I told you guys before, I grew up in New York. I was born in Islip, Long Island, and I was mostly raised up in Binghamton. We moved there when I was real young, young enough to really kind of call Binghamton my home. But my journey with God didn't begin until I was right around that age, and the reason for that is I didn't really grow up in the church. I remember attending church, a few times as a little kid, but didn't understand why we were there. Didn't understand what was going on. As a kid, we have a tendency to sort of tune out anything that we don't quite understand and kind of just stick to what we know. But how I found out about God, I actually owe to my cousin Paris. So Paris and I were real close as kids. We're very close in age. I think we're only about 6 or 7 months apart. And often, my family and we would go down to Long Island from Binghamton, so we were up and down state all the time. We'd go into the city and stuff like that. So, I refer to the whole New York as really my home. But my grandmother's house was sort of the primary spot for us on those visits. Reason being, we were originally from there. I was born in a house not too far away from hers. So right around 5 or 6 years old, I remember we were on a trip, and it was getting kind of late in the day, but it was kind of warm out. The sun was still somewhat out. And my grandmother was just kind of relaxing in the living room along with my mother, and she said, "You know what? Why don't you guys go play outside?" So we went into the driveway, and at that age, we just loved to play pretend. I think we started off as Batman and ended up somewhere around Ninja Turtles. But how God comes into play is as my cousin Paris and I were playing pretend in the driveway, I noticed that the moon was starting to come out. It was starting to get a little bit darker, still light enough to be outside, but dark enough to see the moon. And I remember looking up and I said, "Look, it's the man in the moon. He's looking down on us." And my cousin Paris, who had previously talked to my grandmother about God, had somewhat of an idea of what I was talking about, even more than I did. When I was referring to the man in the moon, I was really referring to a song that I had heard from Guns N' Roses, probably on the way down. It was a popular song at the time. It was "The Cat's in the Cradle, the Silver Spoon, Little Boy Believes in the Man in the Moon." So that's really where I picked that up from. And when I said it, I wasn't even necessarily talking about a literal man standing on the moon. I was really just kind of messing around. But, it stopped Paris dead in her tracks, and she says, "Yeah, you're right." And I said, "Yeah, I know I'm right," thinking that we're still pretending. And she said, "Well, no, there's literally a man on the moon. He's looking down on us right now. His name is God." And I said, "His name is God." I never heard a term like that, at least not to my understanding, who God was, or that there was actually somebody up there looking down on us. It was almost kind of a jarring feeling to a 5 or 6 year old. And, as I started to realize that we were no longer pretending, she began to explain to me what my grandmother had explained to her. My grandmother was a godly woman. She studied the Bible. She knew what she was talking about. And she basically said, "Yeah, there's literally a man named God. He's up in the sky. We can't see him, but he can see us, and he's looking at us right now. He can probably hear us." So thinking maybe she's serious, maybe she's not, I began sort of shouting at the moon at this God fellow, And I don't remember exactly what I said. I don't think it was anything disrespectful or anything like that. It was really just more like trying to interact with this so-called being that was up in the sky that I was really sort of having trouble even believing was there. I mean, how can there be somebody up there that I can't see? You know. So from there, she began to explain more. She said, "Yeah, God's been up there. He's always been up there a long time. He knows us well, and he watches over us, and he can see us, and he knows everything about us, but we can't see him." So with that, that jarring feeling sort of came into play, and I looked at her and I said, "Who told you this?" And she said, "Well, Granny." And Granny is just what we call our grandmother. She was referring to my father's mother, her mother's mother. That's how her and I were related. And I almost was skeptical, but I mean, she seemed very adamant, very serious about what she was talking about. So with that, it began to get real dark. I think we were called in by either my mother or my grandmother, possibly, and we went inside. And I remember when we got inside, my mother and my grandmother were sitting in the living room. They were watching Jeopardy, as my grandmother loved to do, and they were just chit chatting, just talking about this and that. And when it dawned on me what we had just talked about, I looked over to my grandmother and I said, "Granny, is it true that there's a man on the moon that watches us from the far and he can see us?" And she kind of looked at me puzzled. And my cousin then chimed in and said, "He's talking about God." And she goes, "Oh, God, yes, yes, dear. There is a God, and he watches over us. He doesn't live on the moon. He lives in a place called heaven, and it's outside the earth and it's outside space, but he can see us. And not only can he see us, but he created us. We come from him, and he watches over us and protects us from, things that could potentially harm us." So with that came, sort of a comforting feeling. It's, here we got this man up in heaven who watches over us, and not only does that, but he sort of takes on the fatherly role of not only creating us but protecting us. And to me, that was very appealing. As a child, I was really kind of taken aback by that. So with that being said, I then turned to my mother, and of course, young boys, we always go to mom when we need to solidify information. I said, "Mom, is that true?" And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, "Yes, that's absolutely the truth. There is a God, and he loves you so, so much." From that day forward, I was a believer. I never stopped believing in God from that point on. But obviously, that was really just the beginning stages. I mean, I knew that God existed. I knew that he loved me, but I didn't really know anything about God. That came much later. And there was a series of trials that I went through throughout my life, through my parents' divorce, through moving around a lot, and so on and so forth. But that was really sort of the defining beginning of me and God's relationship, and the fact that I just knew that he was there, and I believed that he was there. Thank you, guys. I hope I gave you enough information. I think I'm going a little bit over in the time. So yes, I am. I'm going to go ahead and stop this here. But thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.